Emily Carter believed. Daniel Reeves was her forever until love turned into survival and trust became the most dangerous mistake she ever made. Emily Carter never imagined her quiet life would one day spiral into something out of a nightmare. She lived alone in a modest house on the edge of a peaceful suburban street, spending her days teaching literature at the local high school and her evenings curled up with a book. Her world was predictable, safe, and small until she met Daniel Reeves. It happened on an ordinary Saturday morning in early spring. She was standing in line at a small bookstore, holding a stack of mystery novels, when the man in front of her accidentally dropped a book. She picked it up and handed it to him, and that simple gesture changed everything. Daniel's smile was warm, his voice calm and sincere. He told her he was a contractor, working on a renovation project nearby. They spoke for a few minutes about books, about life, and when they parted ways, Emily felt a spark she hadn't felt in years. Over the next few weeks, they kept running into each other at the cafe near her school, at the grocery store. Even during her morning walks, it felt natural, like fate was quietly weaving their paths together. Daniel soon asked her out for coffee, and that one date turned into many more. He listened to her stories with genuine interest, remembered the smallest details about her day, and made her laugh in ways she had forgotten she could. To Emily, he seemed steady and grounded, a man who carried no darkness, no secrets. After a few months, she introduced him to her friends, and they all adored him. He was polite, attentive, and had an easy charm that put everyone at ease. Daniel's background, however, was something he rarely discussed. He mentioned growing up in different towns, moving around for work, never staying in one place too long. Emily didn't press for details. She assumed he had a complicated past, maybe a family that wasn't close, or a life full of transitions. Love has a way of softening curiosity, and she chose to focus on what she could see her. Kind man who treated her well. When he moved into her house a year later, it felt like the next logical step. They made small changes together, fresh paint on the walls, a new garden bed, pictures of them smiling on weekend trips. Life seemed perfect. Yet, small things began to unsettle her. Daniel often left for work trips that lasted days, sometimes weeks. He said he was managing renovation sites in nearby towns, but he never shared many details about where or for whom. Once, when he returned home late at night, his clothes smelled faintly of smoke. He brushed it off, saying there had been a small fire at one of the job sites. Another time, she noticed him burning papers in a metal bin behind the house. When she asked what they were, he laughed and told her they were just old bills and receipts. His explanations always sounded reasonable, and she wanted to believe them. Her friends occasionally teased her that Daniel was too good to be true. Emily would laugh along, though sometimes the words stuck in her mind longer than she liked. He was always patient, always composed, almost too much so. She told herself that calmness was a sign of maturity, not concealment. When she tried to picture their future, she imagined marriage, perhaps children, a long life filled with quiet happiness. She never once thought danger could be hiding behind the man who held her so tenderly each night. As the seasons changed, her trust in Daniel grew even deeper. They built routines together, cooking dinners, watching old movies, taking long drives into the countryside. Emily believed she had finally found the person she could grow old with. Yet, deep inside, there were moments when she felt an inexplicable chill, as though something unseen lingered just beyond the edges of their peaceful world. It came in flashes, as sudden silences when certain topics came up, the way his expression hardened when the news mentioned missing people, the times he caught her off guard with a look that didn't seem like his own. But just as quickly as those moments appeared, they vanished behind his familiar warmth. Emily pushed the unease aside. Love made her see what she wanted to see. If only she had listened to those quiet instincts, she might have realized sooner that the man she trusted so completely was hiding something far more sinister than she could have ever imagined. The unease began as something small, almost invisible, like a faint hum she could ignore. Daniel's work trips became more frequent and longer, sometimes with little warning. He would leave early in the morning and return days later, exhausted but oddly silent about where he had been. When Emily asked, he always gave short answers, something about supply delays, new clients, or unexpected problems at construction sites. His calm explanations sounded rehearsed, but she convinced herself that not every man shared everything about his work. She didn't want to be the kind of person who doubted someone she loved. One rainy evening, while cleaning the garage, she came across his open toolbox. Everything inside was neatly arranged, but something caught her eye: a small metal box at the bottom, locked tight with a combination latch. It was different from his usual tools, heavier, with scratches that suggested it had been handled often. She lifted it in her hands, curious. For a few moments, she stared at it, her heart beating faster. A voice inside urged her to try opening it, to see what was inside. But she set it back down. Trust, she reminded herself, was the foundation of love. Yet when she turned off the garage light and went back inside, the image of that locked box lingered in her mind like an unanswered question. The following week, strange things began to happen. A dark sedan started parking across the street, always at odd hours, sometimes early morning, sometimes late at night. The driver never stepped out, and when Emily looked closer, the car would slowly drive away. She told Daniel about it, expecting concern, but he brushed it off, saying it was probably a neighbor's guest or someone lost. His indifference unsettled her. For the first time, she noticed how quickly he dismissed her worries, how his eyes avoided hers when she mentioned the car again. The tension grew when she received an anonymous letter in her mailbox one afternoon. It was a plain white envelope, no return address, no stamps. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 words written in black ink. Ask about Denver. The handwriting was messy, almost russid. Emily stood frozen on her porch, reading it over and over, trying to understand what it meant. Daniel had never mentioned Denver. He always spoke vaguely about his past, about moving around, but never specific places. That night, she left the letter on the kitchen counter, hidden beneath a cookbook, unsure what to do. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was trying to warn her. The next morning, she decided to look through Daniel's things for any sign of connection to Denver, but fear stopped her. She didn't want to cross the line between trust and suspicion. When Daniel came home later that evening, his mood was strange. He seemed distracted, his movements slower, as if his mind was elsewhere. Emily noticed a small cut on his arm and asked what happened. He smiled faintly and said he slipped while fixing a fence at work. His smile didn't reach his eyes. That night, she woke to the sound of footsteps outside their bedroom. She thought it was Daniel going to the kitchen, but the house was silent. Through the crack in the door, she saw a faint light flickering from the living room. When she stepped closer, she saw Daniel standing by the window, staring out into the street. He stood there for a long time, completely still, like he was waiting for something or someone. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. He made coffee, kissed her cheek, and left for work. Emmeline watched him drive away, her stomach twisting with unease. The locked box, the strange car, the letter, none of it made sense. She tried to tell herself she was overthinking, that maybe the stress of work and life had made her paranoid. But, deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong. That evening, as she cleared the kitchen counter, she noticed the envelope was gone. The space where she had hidden it was completely empty. Daniel had found it. Her heart began to race as realization set in. He knew someone had reached out, and now he knew. She knew. The next morning, Emily felt a tension in the air that she couldn't explain. Daniel was unusually quiet, his movements deliberate and slow, like a man deep in thought. It left Ellie saying he had to visit a new work site a few towns over, but the way he avoided her eyes made her skin crawl. As soon as his truck disappeared down the street, she locked the door behind him. She didn't know what she was searching for, but something inside told her that whatever was happening wasn't just her imagination anymore. Her first stop was the garage. The small metal box was still there, sitting inside the toolbox, cold and silent. This time, she didn't hesitate. She fetched a screwdriver from a shelf and began prying at the latch until it finally snapped open with a sharp crack. Inside were several items that didn't belong to the other 3 driver's licenses, each with Daniel's face, but different names. Beneath them were folded papers, yellowed with age, and a stack of faded photographs showing houses under construction. Emily's breath caught when she noticed something else clipped to the papers. Newspaper clippings. The headlines made her hands tremble. Woman found dead in abandoned home. Police search for missing contractor. Denver authorities still hunting suspect in triple homicide. Every detail lined up with a timeline of Daniel's so-called work trips. The dates, the locations, it all fit. Her body went cold as she realized the truth she had been trying not to see. The man who shared her bed, who made her coffee every morning, was the same man who had been running from a violent past. He wasn't Daniel Reeves. He wasn't even who he claimed to be. Emily spent hours reading through everything, her mind spinning. The articles described a man named Mark Devlin, a contractor accused of killing 3 women over a span of 2 years. The victims were all found inside unfinished homes, each site connected to a company he once worked for. Police suspected he had changed his identity and fled before they could catch him. There was even a grainy photo attached to one clipping, slightly younger, but unmistakably Daniel. Her heart raced as she gathered all the evidence and took pictures of everything with her phone. She copied the photos to a USB drive and hid it in the back of her closet. She told herself she would take it to the police the next morning, but the hours dragged by, and fear began to sink in. What if he found out? What if he already knew she'd been digging through his things? Every sound in the house made her jump. When night came, Daniel Cayet. His voice sounded calm, almost too calm. He said he'd be home the next day and that he had a surprise for her, a trip to the mountains, just the 2 of them. Emily forced herself to respond with excitement, pretending everything was normal. Her hands shook as she hung up the phone. He had never suggested a trip before. Why now? Unable to sleep, she sat in the dark, watching the clock tick past midnight. She replayed every moment she'd shared with him, his kindness, his patience, his careful attention to her routines. None of it felt real anymore. Every gesture that once made her feel loved now felt rehearsed, calculated. She understood now why he burned papers, why he avoided talking about his past, why he never let her meet his family. He was always one step ahead, covering his tracks, making sure no one ever got too close. At dawn, she packed a small bag with essentials and kept her car keys close. She didn't have a plan, but she knew she had to leave. Just as she was about to walk out the door, headlights flashed through the window. Daniel's truck pulled into the driveway earlier than expected. Her body froze. He wasn't supposed to be back yet. She quickly hid the bag behind the couch and sat at the table, pretending to drink coffee as he walked in. His eyes scanned the room for a moment too long, as if searching for something. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He said nothing about the trip, nothing about the letter. The air between them felt heavy, suffocating. Emily tried to act calm, but she could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. She had no idea that Daniel had already discovered the broken lock on the box in the garage. He knew what she had found, and now the game between them had changed. Emily barely slept that night. Every sound made her flinch: the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, even the faint rustle of the wind against the window. Daniel's presence in the house felt heavier than ever. He moved quietly, almost too quietly, like a man who wanted to avoid being heard. When she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sight of him sitting calmly at the kitchen table. staring at her with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. He said he had packed their bags for a weekend getaway. His voice was smooth and steady, but underneath it, she sensed something sharp. She didn't dare. The drive began like any other trip they'd taken, but there was an edge to the air. Daniel talked about nothing in particular: music, the weather, the changing leaves, but Emily could barely hear him. Her mind was busy calculating. The road signs showed they were heading north, away from the main highway, toward the mountains. The farther they drove, the fewer cars they passed. Her phone signal weakened, then vanished completely. She tried to sound casual as she asked where they were going. He said it was a surprise, somewhere private where they could reset. The word unsettled her. He kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting loosely on his thigh, his knuckles pale. She noticed small cuts on his fingers, like he had been working with something sharp. Hours later, they reached a dirt road that twisted through a dense forest. The sun was dipping low when they stopped at a small, isolated cabin. It looked old, the paint peeling, the windows dusty. Daniel unloaded the bags in silence and walked inside as if he already knew the place. Emily followed, forcing her expression to remain calm. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and something faintly metallic. She saw a pile of tools in the corner: shovels, ropes, even a crowbar. Her chest tightened. Daniel told her to rest while he checked the generator outside. As soon as he stepped out, Emily's eyes darted around the cabin for anything she could use: a phone, a weapon, a way out. In his duffel bag near the door, she found another wallet with a new ID. The name on it wasn't Daniel Reeves or Mark Devlinet. It was someone else entirely. Next to it was a stack of cash and a train ticket dated 2 days ahead. He was planning to leave, to disappear again, and she was part of the plan in a way she didn't want to imagine. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She shoved the wallet back into the bag just as she heard the door creak open. Daniel stepped inside, his face unreadable. His eyes swept the room, landing briefly on the duffel bag before meeting hers. The air between them thickened. He asked if she was all right, his voice calm but his tone distant. Emily forced a smile and nodded. He walked closer, too close, and placed a hand on her shoulder. His fingers were cold, his touch too firm. The night descended quickly. Daniel suggested they sit by the fire. Emily watched him pour 2 glasses of wine, her stomach churning. When he handed her one, she pretended to take a sip and set it aside. He talked about starting over, about letting go of the past, about people who ruin good things by asking too many questions. The words slid from his tongue slowly, each one measured. When he finally stood up and walked toward the door, saying he needed more wood, Emily moved fast. She grabbed her phone and rushed to the corner of the cabin, but the screen was blank, no signal, no way to call for help. She looked out the window and saw him standing near the trees, not gathering wood, just staring into the darkness as if listening for something. Minutes felt like hours. When he came back in, his expression had changed completely. The calm mask was gone. His eyes were wild, his jaw tense. Without a word, he locked the cabin door behind him. Emily's heart raced as he stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the floor. She realized then that he hadn't brought her here to heal anything. He had brought her here to end something. The night outside was cold and silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the walls and made every heartbeat sound too loud. Emily stood frozen as Daniel moved closer, his steps slow and deliberate. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing a darkness she had only glimpsed before. His eyes, once warm and gentle, were now sharp and distant. He said nothing, but the weight of his stare told her everything. He knew she had discovered his secret. She could see it in the way his hand brushed against his pocket, where she was certain a knife or something worse was hidden. Her mind raced. She needed to survive the night. Acting calm was her only chance. She forced herself to meet his gaze, tried to steady her voice, and said she was tired, but she wanted to rest before their big day. For a moment, he studied her, and then, to her relief, he nodded. He told her to sleep in the bedroom while he stayed by the fire, but the tone in his voice carried something final, like a man giving permission for a last request. Emily slipped into the bedroom, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might give her away. She scanned the small room, no phone, no window large enough to escape through. She spotted a loose floorboard near the bed and knelt to pry it open. Beneath it, she found an old rusted hammer. Her hands trembled as she held it. It wasn't much, but it was something. She tucked it onto the mattress and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the faint creaks of Daniel moving in the next room. Every minute stretched into an hour. Sometime after midnight, she heard footsteps approaching. She gripped the hammer tightly. The door handle turned slowly, and Daniel's shadow filled the doorway. He stepped inside, whispering her name in that low, calm voice that had once comforted her. She stayed still, pretending to sleep, hoping he would turn away, but he didn't. She felt him move closer until his breath brushed her cheek. Then his hand touched her shoulder, and she reacted on instinct. Emily swung the hammer with all her strength, striking him once across the arm. He shouted in pain, stumbling backward, his eyes flashing with rage. She jumped from the bed and ran, slamming the bedroom door behind her. She raced to the front door, but it was locked tight. Behind her, Daniel's voice broke through the cabin low, furious, trembling with betrayal. He called her name again, his footsteps pounding toward her. She fumbled with the lock, but before she could open it, he grabbed her from behind, pulling her to the floor. They struggled in the darkness, the room spinning around her. She felt the sharp edge of a knife scrape her arm as she fought to push him away. The hammer slipped from her hand, clattering across the floor. Desperation gave her strength she didn't know she had. She kicked, twisted, and finally broke free, crawling toward the door. She reached for the handle, flung it open, and stumbled into the freezing night. The forest was a blur of shadows and cold air. She ran without direction, branches tearing at her clothes, her lungs burning. Behind her, she heard him calling out, his voice echoing through the trees, angry and pleading all at once. Then came the sound of snapping branches. He was chasing her. Emily ran until she reached the edge of a ravine she hadn't seen in the dark. The ground crumbled beneath her feet, and she barely stopped herself from falling. She turned to see Daniel a few feet away, his face twisted with fury and disbelief. He shouted something she couldn't understand and lunged forward. She stepped back instinctively, her hand brushing against a rock. As he grabbed her arm, she pushed back with all her strength. His footing slipped on the damp ground, and for a split second, their eyes met, his full of shock, hers full of terror. Then, fell. The sound of his body hitting the rocks below was swallowed by the wind. Emily collapsed to the ground, shaking uncontrollably. She sat there until dawn, staring into the fog that clung to the trees. When she finally heard the sound of sirens in the distance, relief washed over her like a wave. A park ranger had found her abandoned car miles away and followed the tracks into the forest. The police found Daniel's body at the bottom of the ravine later that morning. In his bag, they discovered multiple IDs, stolen credit cards, and clippings about the murders in Denver. Everything Emily had feared was true. He wasn't Daniel Reeves. His real name was Mark Devlin, the man who had vanished years ago after killing 3 women who trusted him. In the weeks that followed, Emily couldn't escape the feeling that he was still watching her somehow. She left the town, changed her number, and sold the house they once shared. But no matter how far she went, she couldn't forget the face of the man she once loved. He had hidden his darkness behind charm and kindness, behind trust and affection. She had given him her heart, and he had almost taken her life. The man she trusted had carried a deadly secret, and it had nearly destroyed her.